So if you were to hold a single human neuron in your hand, hypothetically speaking, of course.
Right, highly hypothetical.
Yeah, but I mean, if you did, it really wouldn't seem like much. It is essentially just a tiny, wet biological switch.
It's meat. It's just a
Yeah.
microscopic piece of meat.
Exactly. It fires or it doesn't fire. It's totally binary. I mean, it doesn't write poetry, it doesn't fall in love, and it definitely doesn't sit around pondering its own, existential dread.
No, it just reacts to chemical gradients.
Yeah.
There's no magic
Well,
there.
right. But you stack 86 billion of those mindless little switches together, and suddenly they somehow wake up. And that is why we are here today. Welcome to a custom deep dive where we are stripping away all the comforting philosophical fluff.
Because the reality is deeply uncomfortable.
It really is. We are taking a massive stack of sources today that explore the works of the composer J.S. Bach, the artist M.C. Escher, and the mathematician Kurt Gödel. And we are using them to answer one incredibly brutal question.
How does lifeless, indifferent matter create the illusion of a self-aware mind?
Yes. Because that's the taboo core of all of this, right? We are deconstructing the literal blueprint of human consciousness.
And to do that, we can't just look at biology or neuroscience.
Yeah.
We have to look at the cold, hard architecture of how meaning is generated from fundamentally meaningless parts.
Which means looking at how intelligence actually works on a structural level.
Precisely. We're going to break down the mechanics of your own mind, and we're going to explain why your profound, cherished sense of free will is, structurally speaking, a total hallucination.
But functionally, it's a hallucination you are trapped in.
Right. A very concrete, inescapable reality for the person experiencing it.
So to even begin to understand how billions of biological dominoes create this feeling of I, we have to start with a very specific, totally mind-bending concept from our source material.
The strange loop.
The strange loop. And the best way into this concept isn't through neurology, it's actually through art and music, which I think is fascinating because we tend to view art as this high-minded spiritual thing.
When really it's just hacking our cognitive blind spots.
Exactly. So there is this brilliant kind of dark historical anecdote in the sources. The year is 1747.
Johann Sebastian Bach is 62 years old.
Right. He's getting older, he's established, and he travels to Potsdam to visit King Frederick the Great of Prussia.
And King Frederick is not just some military brood. He's an avid musician, a flutist, and he's obsessed with new technology.
Yeah, he had just bought several pianofortes, which were the brand new invention by Gottfried Silbermann.
These were the very first pianos.
Right, because unlike a harpsichord, which just plucks a string at one uniform volume, totally flat, these new instruments let the player actually strike the string softly or loudly.
It's about dynamics. For a composer in 1747, the king basically owned a room full of state-of-the-art synthesizers.
It's the ultimate rich guy flex. So Bach arrives at the palace. The guy hasn't even had time to change out of his traveling clothes. He's probably exhausted.
And the king immediately corners him. It's a pure power dynamic.
Total power play. The king gives Bach this highly complex, mathematically twisted musical theme and demands that he improvise a 3-part fugue on it. Just right there on the spot.
Which is an insane request.
No.
But Bach sits down and he just pulls it off flawlessly. The entire court is stunned.
But Bach doesn't just leave it there. He goes home to Leipzig and he becomes totally obsessed with the king's theme. He spends months composing this massive, intricate, borderline psychotic puzzle of a masterpiece called the Musical Offering.
It's basically him showing the king, you think you understand structure? Watch this.
Exactly. And the absolute crown jewel of this work is a piece known as the Endlessly Rising Canon.
Which is a brilliant example of a structural delusion.
It really is. Like, if you listen to this canon, the music modulates, it shifts its key constantly upward.
It sounds like it is getting higher and higher and higher, a perpetual climb.
Yeah, but somehow, at the absolute end of the sequence, it arrives exactly in the exact same key where it began.
It's climbing a staircase that constantly goes up, but somehow deposits you right back on the ground floor.
Which, mechanically speaking, should be impossible. You can't just keep going up and end up where you started.
No, physically you can't. But Bach was actively exploiting the way human brains process sound. He was weaponizing our biological limitations.
So how does it actually work? Because the sources mention this psychoacoustic illusion.
Right. To recreate this effect perfectly today, we use what are called shepherd tones.
Shepherd tones. Okay, explain that for everyone.
So to build a shepherd tone, you play several parallel scales across different octaves simultaneously.
Okay, so a low scale, a middle scale, a high scale, all playing the same notes at the same time.
Exactly. And as the notes rise in pitch, you gradually, almost imperceptibly, fade out the volume on the highest octave.
So the high notes are disappearing.
Yes. And at the exact same time, you very quietly fade in the volume on the lowest octave.
Oh, wow. So the listener's brain just latches on to the upward movement of the middle frequencies.
Your brain tracks the motion, but it completely misses the fact that the sonic floor is constantly being reset beneath it.
That is so deeply manipulative. By the time the melody should theoretically be an entire octave higher, the volume weights have just shifted so perfectly that you are right back at your starting pitch.
You go up forever without ever gaining a single inch of altitude. That is the auditory manifestation of a strange loop.
A closed system that tricks you into thinking it's infinite.
Exactly.
And MC Escher pulls off the exact same scam, right? But he does it by hacking our visual cortex instead of our ears.
Escher is the visual master of the strange loop. The source text brings up his famous lithograph, drawing hands.
Yeah, the parallel there is just brutal. You look at it and you see a piece of paper pinned to a board. And out of this flat 2D paper, a lifelike three-dimensional left hand rises up.
It's holding a pencil.
Right, and it's sketching the cuff and wrist of a right hand. But out of that sketched cuff, a three-dimensional right hand emerges. And it is holding a pencil, sketching the left hand into existence.
It is the ultimate visual chicken and egg problem.
It really is. But, I mean, what makes Escher's trick so effective isn't just the shading, it's the psychological trap. He forces the viewer to accept a total paradox as a closed, functioning system.
Because we are biologically wired to seek patterns, we get so mesmerized trying to figure out which hand started drawing first.
That we totally miss the reality of the situation. We completely ignore what the source text calls the inviolate level.
The real world.
Yes. We forget about the real-life, flesh and blood MC Escher just standing in his studio outside the frame, holding a real pencil, drawing both of those hands.
We fall for the simulation. And that blind spot is crucial because it gives us the formal, structural definition of a strange loop.
Which is what exactly?
A strange loop is an endless process represented in a finite way. It occurs when hierarchical levels, like the level of the artist and the level of the drawing, fold back on themselves.
So the line between what is inside the system and what is outside the system just completely blurs.
It vanishes entirely. In art and music, we look at this and call it a beautiful paradox. We think it's profound.
But it's actually deeply unsettling because it proves how easily our perception is hijacked.
Oh, absolutely. But art and music are one thing, right? We expect artists to play with illusions. We tolerate it.
Right, but we don't tolerate it in math. The bedrock of logic and mathematics is supposed to be immune to this kind of trickery.
It's supposed to be cold, hard,
Yeah.
absolute truth.
Exactly. But then the mathematician Gödel comes along in the 20th century, and he finds a strange loop hiding inside the very fabric of logic itself.
And this wasn't just a neat puzzle. This was an existential crisis for science. To really appreciate the earthquake that Gödel caused, you have to look at the sheer desperation of mathematicians at that time.
They were panicking.
Complete panic, because for centuries, language had been plagued by these paradoxes of self-reference. The sources point to the most ancient one, the Epimenides paradox.
Right. A man from Crete says, all Cretans are liars.
Or, to distill it to its purest, most toxic form, this statement is false.
Which instantly breaks your brain because, I mean, think about it. If the statement is true, then it must be false.
But if it's false, then it's telling the truth, which makes it true.
It's a cognitive short circuit, an endless ping-pong match. There's also Grelling's paradox from the sources, which is even weirder.
Grelling's paradox is a linguistic nightmare. Take the word heterological.
Right, which means a word that doesn't describe itself.
Exactly. For example, the word long is actually a very short word, so it doesn't describe itself. Therefore, long is heterological.
Okay, simple enough. But the trap is when you ask, is the word heterological?
And you are instantly sucked into a logical vortex.
If it is, it isn't. If it isn't, it is.
Now, philosophers, they could debate these language paradoxes all day over drinks. But for mathematicians, this was terrifying.
Because math relies on absolute certainty. If logic could just collapse upon itself simply by pointing a finger at itself, how could anyone trust the foundations of arithmetic?
They couldn't. And this fear reached a total boiling point. It prompted two of the most brilliant minds of the era, Bertrand Russell and Alfred North Whitehead, to try and essentially enforce martial law on mathematics.
They wrote this massive multi-volume set of books called Principia Mathematica.
It was an act of pure hubris. Their entire goal was to build this impenetrable, sterilized fortress of logic where a strange loop could never, ever exist.
Wait, so Russell and Whitehead basically tried to make it illegal for mathematics to look in the mirror.
That is exactly what they did. They invented this concept called the theory of types.
Hmm.
They created a strict, absolute, top-down hierarchy.
Okay, how did that work?
At the bottom level, you had an object language. These were just basic statements about numbers.
Like 1 + 1 = 2.
Right. Then above that, you had a meta language. This level contains statements about the object language.
So talking about the math.
Yes. And above that, a meta-meta language.
Yeah.
And so on. But the ironclad, unbreakable rule of Principia Mathematica was that a statement on one level could never, ever make a claim about its own level.
So a formula could only look down. It could only talk about the level below it. No self-reference, no loops.
They locked the entire system down. It was rigid, it was sterile, and they thought they had saved absolute truth.
But then Kurt Gödel figured out a way to break their rules. He smuggled a virus into their fortress. And he did it using a mechanism called Gödel numbering.
Gödel realized something incredibly dangerous. He realized that any formal system of mathematics, no matter how strict, is ultimately just a collection of physical symbols on a page.
Pluses, minuses, equal signs, variables, just ink.
Just ink. So he devised a brilliant system to map every single mathematical symbol to a specific prime number.
So it's basically a cipher, like a little kid's decoder ring where A = 1 and B = 2, but scaled up to this insanely complex mathematical level.
It was exactly a cipher. Because every mathematical statement is just a sequence of these symbols, Gödel could multiply his prime numbers together to generate a single, massive, totally unique number for every possible mathematical equation.
Like a unique barcode for every single mathematical thought that could ever exist.
Precisely. A Gödel number. But here is the genius, fatal step. Because these barcodes are themselves just numbers, you can write regular mathematical equations about them.
Oh my God. He turned Bath into a Trojan horse.
He did. He wrote equations that seemed on the surface to just be calculating properties of really huge numbers.
But because those numbers were actually the barcodes for other equations, the math was secretly talking about itself.
He bypassed Russell and Whitehead's entire strict hierarchy. He smuggled the strange loop right past the guards.
And the result of this virus was Gödel's incompleteness theorem.
The theorem that broke mathematics. By allowing math to become introspective, Gödel was able to construct a mathematical formula that essentially translated to. This specific formula cannot be proven within this mathematical system.
Which brings the entire arrogant fortress of Principia Mathematica crashing down. Because think about the brutal logic of it. If the system can prove the formula, then the formula is lying.
Which means the system is inconsistent. It's broken.
But if the system cannot prove it, then the formula is telling the truth.
Which means there are absolute, undeniable mathematical truths that are forever unprovable within the rules of the system.
Logic will always fundamentally have a blind spot. Any mechanical, rule-based system that is complex enough to do basic arithmetic will eventually fold back on itself and hit a wall it cannot see past.
It guarantees that absolute certainty is a myth.
But, and this is where things get really uncomfortable, this raises a massive question. If Gödel proved that rigid mechanical systems will always hit these blank spots.
Right.
But we human beings can look at Gödel's unprovable statement, we can step outside the system, and we can easily see that it is true. Doesn't that imply we aren't machines?
Ah, the old human exceptionalism argument.
Well, yeah. I mean, it feels like mathematical proof that humans have some kind of non-mechanical spark, a soul,
Right.
or some level of intuition that a computer or an artificial intelligence can never, ever replicate.
You've just arrived at one of the most famous and, frankly, most desperate historical arguments against artificial intelligence.
Tell me about J.R. Lucas.
In 1961, an Oxford philosopher named J.R. Lucas published an essay making exactly that case. It was pure cope.
Cope? How so?
Well, Lucas argued that computers are entirely formal mechanical systems. Therefore, they are irrevocably bound by Gödel's incompleteness theorem.
Okay, a machine will always hit a Gödelian wall it cannot see past.
Exactly. But because a human mind can supposedly observe the machine, step outside its formal logic, and see the truth that the machine misses, Lucas concluded that the human mind can never be fully modeled by a machine.
He claimed we will always be one step above the code.
Right. That we have some magical, unquantifiable essence.
I mean, logically, to a lot of people, that sounds like a slam dunk. The machine is trapped in the maze. The human is looking at the maze from above.
It is a very comforting thought for humanity. We want to feel special. We want to believe we aren't just biological automatons. But our source text completely dismantles Lucas's argument by pointing out a devastating flaw in his reasoning.
He confused the levels.
Lucas completely mixes up the hardware with the software.
So, to really understand where Lucas went wrong and why human exceptionalism is basically a myth, think of a massive, modern, open-world video game.
Perfect analogy.
Right. At the hardware level, the actual processor, the microchips, the motherboard, the system is incredibly rigid.
It is operating strictly on binary code, ones and zeros, transistors flipping on and off according to the unforgiving, blind laws of physics.
There is zero flexibility there. A transistor cannot just choose to be half on because it feels like it.
No, it's totally deterministic.
But if you zoom out to the software level, the actual game being generated by those billions of rigid transistors, you have this incredibly fluid, complex, unpredictable world.
You have weather systems, you have non-player characters making weird choices, you have a digital landscape where millions of surprising informal things happen every second.
Exactly. The rigidity of the hardware enables the fluidity of the software. Lucas looked at computers and judged them purely by their rigid hardware.
But he looked at humans and judged us by our fluid software. Our minds, our intuition, our art. It's completely hypocritical. If you are going to compare humans and machines fairly, you have to compare them on the exact same level.
Right, because our hardware is just as rigid as a silicon chip. I mean, the 86 billion neurons in a human brain are operating deterministically.
They are entirely bound by the laws of chemistry and physics.
A neuron fires an electrical action potential, or it doesn't. There is absolutely no magic happening at the cellular level. There's no soul inside the synapse.
Exactly. Just as the strict, inflexible laws of binary code support a beautiful, messy, open-world video game, the strict, microscopic rules of computer hardware can absolutely support the messy, intuitive flexibility of artificial intelligence.
And by the exact same token, the deterministic firing of our neural hardware supports the magnificent illusion of human thought.
Lucas's argument fails because he was terrified to admit that a rigid, meaningless system can generate a flexible, meaning-making one, provided the system is layered correctly.
But okay, if that is the mechanical reality, if my brain is really just 86 billion deterministic biological switches falling like dominoes, according to physics, how do I exist?
You mean your ego?
Yes. Where does my sense of I come from? If every choice I make is just the inevitable result of chemical reactions in my meat hardware, why do I feel like I am driving the car? Where does free will live in this system?
This is where we arrive at the ultimate, most terrifying tangled hierarchy. Inside your brain, there's that invisible, inviolate level we talked about, the microscopic neural hardware.
Right.
As a conscious being, you have absolutely zero access to this level.
Yeah.
You cannot feel a specific synapse firing. You don't consciously control the release of your own serotonin.
It's entirely hidden from us, like a user interface on a computer monitor. When I move a file on my desktop, I see a little folder icon moving across the screen. I don't see the millions of microscopic magnetic changes happening on the hard drive.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. The folder icon in your brain lives on the symbol level. This is your software. This is where concepts, memories, and ideas reside.
Okay, so how does consciousness ignite from that?
As a human brain develops from infancy, it begins to map the world by creating symbols. It creates a neural symbol for mother, a symbol for dog, a symbol for pain. But the true breakthrough happens when the brain creates a symbol for itself.
The sources refer to this as the self symbol.
Yes. The brain builds an overgrown, incredibly complex, dynamic, parasitic symbol that represents its own existence and its own processes.
And this is where the strange loop takes hold.
Precisely. This high-level software, the self symbol, the ego reaches back down and begins to dictate to the very neural hardware that created it. The distinction between cause and effect completely collapses into a self-reinforcing resonance.
The sources use this great thought experiment to illustrate the vortex. Imagine a robot programmed to navigate a simple maze. Normally, it just processes sensor data and turns left or right, very linear. But what happens if the robot's software is complex enough to evaluate its choices using a concept of its own identity?
It becomes self-referential.
Right. If it sits at an intersection and processes the thought, I usually turn left here, but today I feel like exploring the right, the levels cross over. The hardware is executing a command dictated by the software's self-image.
It gets sucked into a vortex. The system is constantly monitoring its own high-level thoughts, reacting to its own reactions, looping back on itself infinitely.
In that swirling, tangled hierarchy, That is the birthplace of what we call consciousness.
Which finally answers your question about free will. The mechanics of the strange loop explain exactly why we feel like we have agency, even though we don't.
Right, because our self symbol has high-level access. You know what you are thinking about. You know you are choosing a salad over a burger.
But because your user interface is structurally blind to the billions of lower-level neural dominoes that actually made that choice inevitable,
You experience a profound disconnect. You have perfect self-knowledge of your software and total pathetic self-ignorance of your hardware.
and that blindness to the microscopic causes creates the sensation of spontaneous choice. That precise balance of ignorance and awareness is the feeling of free will.
It's not magic, it's just an information deficit.
We are self-programmed machines. But because the architecture of our minds inherently shields us from seeing the microscopic code running the program, we experience the profound illusion of absolute agency.
We hallucinate that we are an uncaused cause.
We really do. And look at the harsh current world relevance of this. This isn't just abstract philosophy.
No, it maps perfectly onto our current global decay. I mean, look at how terrified society is of artificial intelligence right now.
We treat AI as this alien, unnatural threat. We talk about it taking over, destroying human uniqueness.
Because we refuse to admit that we are just biological AI. The digital alienation we feel today, the mass cultural psychosis,
Yeah.
it's all just societal strange loops.
Exactly. Algorithms feed us content, which shapes our behavior, which feeds data back into the algorithm, which shapes it further. We are already predictable nodes in a massive digital tangled hierarchy.
We are building our replacements, and we shouldn't be surprised when silicon software supersedes wetware software. It's just the next logical level of the loop.
It points to a very unforgiving future. Techno-feudalism, post-human irrelevance. If consciousness is just a mechanical byproduct of self-reference, there's no reason to assume humans are the final or best vessel for it.
We're just the first draft. We are the endlessly rising scales of Doc's music, constantly moving but grounded in a physical, deterministic reality.
We are the looping, paradoxical staircases of Escher.
We are the unprovable self-referential truths of Gödel's mathematics. We are quite literally nothing more than a strange loop made of ordinary, indifferent physical matter that somehow, through sheer architectural complexity, woke up one day and learned to say the word I.
The structure of that I is fascinating and deeply fragile. To close our exploration today, I want to direct your attention to one final, very unsettling image from our sources.
Let's hear it.
It's another piece by M.C. Escher, a lithograph called Print Gallery.
Oh, that one is a trip.
It depicts a young man standing in an art gallery looking at a picture of a ship in a harbor.
Right. But as your eyes follow the background of that picture, the harbor transitions into a town.
And in that town is a building. And that building is the very gallery where the young man is standing, looking at the picture.
The image swells and twists outwards, swallowing itself in this massive, impossible loop. The observer is literally inside the art he is observing.
Exactly. But here is the critical detail. If you look at the mathematical center of that swirling, twisting lithograph, there is a circular, blank, white blemish.
Right in the middle of the paper.
And inside that blank spot, Escher simply wrote his signature. He didn't leave it blank out of laziness.
No, he had to.
The mathematical rules of the grid Escher used to create that loop made it physically impossible to fill in that center point without breaking the logic of the entire drawing.
The system fundamentally could not complete itself.
It required a blind spot to exist. So as you go about your day, I ask you to ponder this. Since you are a strange loop, a complex physical machine desperately hallucinating its own existence, what is the invisible structural blemish at the exact center of your own mind?
What is the one fundamental truth about yourself that the laws of logic absolutely forbid you from ever seeing?
Because if you ever did see it,
It really makes you wonder. If you ever did manage to peel back the interface and look directly into that blind spot, would you still be you? Or would the whole illusion just collapse? Think about that tiny, wet, biological switch in your head firing in the dark, trying to turn a light on itself.